Hello, this is Beach Music by Pat Conroy, an excerpt. To describe our growing up in the low country of South Carolina, I would have to take you to the marsh on a spring day, flush the great blue heron from its silent occupation, scatter marsh hens as we sink to our knees in mud, open you an oyster with a pocket knife and feed it to you from the shell and say, there, that taste, that's the taste of my childhood. I would say, breathe deeply, and you would breathe and remember that smell for the rest of your life, the bold, fecund aroma of the tidal marsh, exquisite and sensual, the smell of the South in heat, a smell like new milk, and spilled wine, all perfumed with seawater. One should never underestimate the power of good teaching, but even bad teaching can have a strong effect. Delia Senius taught South Carolina history for over 40 years to the ninth graders of Waterford and squelched any passion for history that was budding in the imaginations of her students. There was no area of the subject that she could not render paralyzingly dull. The text was as dry as a logarithm chart, and her high-pitched, one-toned voice could induce stupor in the most hardened insomniac. It was one of the town's rites of passage to fall asleep in Miss Senius's history class. Her week-long lecture on the siege of Charleston was so tedious that some students left her class never realizing the siege had ended. Mrs. Senius almost grew faint with delight on the first full day of classes in 1962 when she announced to her class that two descendants of some of the most distinguished names in South Carolina history were on her roll of students. She had Capers Middleton and Jordan Elliott stand up to be admired for the good taste they had displayed by being born into such notable families. Capers stood up tall and proud. His face had a chiseled beauty even in ninth grade. But Jordan arose scowling and disoriented in those new surroundings, with the other kids regarding him with suspicion as a transfer student with strange ties to royalty. On the following day, Jordan was tossed from class when he was caught placing wads of juicy fruit, to which Miss Delia Senius was famously allergic, behind the map of colonial South Carolina. Mrs. Senius explained to the class that Jordan was high-spirited and mischievous, but he was only following the immutable laws of genetics, since any fool would know, Mrs. Senius said this breathlessly, that it took a great deal of high spirits to break away from Mother England. And both Capers and Jordan were related to 3 South Carolinians who had signed the Declaration of Independence. She herself, she added, with becoming modesty, was related to only one signer of the Declaration. Both Mr. Middleton and Mr. Elliott come from fine old distinguished South Carolina families. One might ask what difference it could possibly make, but experience teaches it makes all the difference in the world. You can tell by the line of the jaw of both of these young men that they descend from men and women who placed righteousness above mere glitter, justice above mere retribution, and elegance above the showy or the meretricious. You know what you're getting when you do business with a Middleton or an Elliott. Their character is set, their breeding impeccable. Have sons, Capers. Have sons, Jordan. You must not allow these splendid South Carolina names to die out and be relegated into the boneyards of history. Lost my place. We will be studying the writings and exploits of your distinguished ancestors this year, and both of you will walk taller when you apprehend the value of the fine stock from which you issue. Every daughter you have will be a great name lost and cause for sorrow. Every son will be a name carrier. Mike made gagging sounds behind Jordan and whispered, "Hey, name carrier, can I borrow some juicy fruit after I puke?" Jordan passed him a stick of juicy fruit, then shot Mike the finger. Mike said after class, "One can tell from the line of that I'm descended from one of the most distinguished bagel makers on the Upper West Side." "Have sons, Mike, have sons," I cried out happily. "I'd rather watch a jockstrap mildew than listen to that woman's voice," Jordan said. But Mrs. Senius had found her champion in Capers, and he defended both her pedagogy and the content of her course to all comers. It's important to know where you're from, Capers said. Why? I asked. What possible difference could it make? America's a democracy. Everyone gets a fair shake. Nonsense, Jordan said. Half the town's black. Tell me the color of your skin doesn't make a difference in this stupid part of the country. Their time will come, Capers predicted. They haven't earned it yet. You sound like such an idiot, Capers, Jordan said. You're talking like you're 100 years old and you're only in 9th grade. You believe everything your parents believe. I have more respect for my parents than any two people on earth, Capers said. I owe everything to them. You're the unhippest, uncoolest kid I've ever met, man, Jordan said, appraising his cousin with a clear, unstinting California eye. You're lucky you were born so deep in the sticks. Your show would close in a week out on the West Coast. You're calling me a square, aren't you? Capers demanded. It's far worse than that, said Jordan. You're square root, man. You're the kind of guy that likes to wear socks at the beach. Maybe I'm just proud of who I am. Maybe you're just a southern asshole, Jordan shot back. Have sons, Capers. Have sons, Jordan, I said, trying to cut the tension between them. Mike said, this course will help me when I write my memoirs. Jew boy in the Confederacy. Do you think Mrs. Senius ever heard of Ellis Island? It's just a hop, skip, and a jump down from Plymouth Rock. South Carolina history, Jordan said, shaking his head. What a contradiction in terms. I've lived all over the world, and I've never heard one person ever mention this state's name. It's nowhere, man. A loser state if there ever was one. Nothing's ever happened here. The state of South Carolina seceded from the Union first, Capers bristled. We fired on Fort Sumter and were the first to answer the call to arms. Then the North came down and kicked your Confederate asses from Richmond to Vicksburg. We gave as good as we got. Our generalship was superb, said Capers, moving toward a relaxed Jordan with clenched fists. One never reads about Lee's march on New York, but one does come across Sherman's march to the sea. I've studied Civil War battlefields with my father, Capers. I know a lot more about the subject than you do. You're not a true Southerner, Capers announced. I'm an American, pal, and proud of it. Your family arrived in the New World in 1709. Mine came here in 1706. What went wrong with you? Capers asked. When did your family get here, Jack? Mike asked facetiously. 1908, something like that, I said, laughing, and Capers thought the laughter was directed at him. How about your family, Mike? Very early, my family, Mike said. They arrived on these virgin shores the same year the Edsel was introduced in Detroit. Have sons, Mike and I sang together, laughing in each other's arms. For another class, Delia Senius read a chapter from William Elliott's 1859 book, Carolina Sports by Land and Water. Her reading voice was as monotonous as the sound of a running toilet. Half the class was asleep and the other half daydreaming, while Delia labored to bring life to the serviceable prose of Jordan's great-grandfather and Capers's great-great-uncle on his mother's side. Delia read the first chapter and the showcase feature of the book that had once dazzled Yankee fishermen, in which the Honorable Mr. Elliot describes the pursuit of the great manta ray, or devilfish, through the waters of Waterford Sound. Only Delia Senius, with her genius for monotony, could have rendered the hunt for the 2-ton manta ray with its great black-backed wings and bat-shaped body to a colorless tale whose words settled over her class like a sleeping powder. She could make the charge of the Light Brigade sound like the directions for folding a napkin in a debutante's handbook. When Mr. Elliot placed a harpoon near the spine of a devilfish, and the enormous creature towed his slave-powered boat through the choppy waters of Hilton Head, the soft snoring of cheerleaders and football players intermingled, and I felt the sweat soak through the back of my shirt. Great heat and mediocre teaching have done much to lower the collective IQ of the South over the centuries. But one of her students listened to her with breathless attention and drank in every word she uttered. For Capers Middleton, what Delia Senius offered up from the dusty granary of her knowledge played a central part in his image of himself and his world. He not only felt a close personal connection to South Carolina history, he thought of his own life as an enhancement and extension of it. From the day of his birth, he had enjoyed a highly developed sense of entitlement and privilege that had accrued to him through the accomplishments of his ancestors. That Christmas, Capers received from his parents a first edition copy of Carolina Sports by Land and Water. The book thrilled Capers with its spirited accounts of fishing and hunting expeditions that had taken place in a less populated, pre-Civil War low country. The land Eliot described was a green paradise teeming with game and fish. Capers made a spiritual connection with William Eliot and hunted the same animals his ancestor had hunted and fished for the same fish at the exact same locations so lovingly described by this energetic forebear. Capers' father commissioned a black metal worker from Charleston who was expert in the repair of wrought iron fences to fashion a harpoon for Capers exactly like the one wielded by William Eliot when he took to the Channel and Sounds in search of the great manta rays. Capers held this weapon and imagined the wild, dangerous rides that ensued after one of the enormous beasts was harpooned and turned in agony toward the high seas. He called upon the spirits of his ancestors when he tracked bobcat or white-tailed deer through the vast acreage of old rice plantations. He designed a secret task for himself. He wanted to kill every fish and animal that William Eliot had named in his book. In 1964, Jordan's father, now a full colonel, would be sent to a top-secret assignment overseas in a country called Vietnam. At that time, none of us had ever heard of Vietnam. Celestine Eliot took a home on the Point, 3 blocks away from my house, and a block away from both Capers and Mike. That summer, we were inseparable. It was also the summer that Mike, Jordan, and I wished we had paid more attention in Delia Senior's South Carolina history course. In April, on every Sunday, Capers had been borrowing his father's 18-foot Rinkin fishing boat and taking to the river for an all-day fishing trip. All of us were competitive fishermen who took great pride in our gear and tackle. We changed baits and lures frequently as conditions changed and teased each other relentlessly as we went from oyster bank to deep drop in our pursuit of game fish. We baited our hooks with iced-down eels, then cast them in front of the great swishing forms of cobia hunting along the surface. The cobia were torpedo-shaped and powerful, and they were my favorite fish to cook and eat at a campfire. Capers' harpoon had proved a symbolic but useless gift. During a flounder gigging trip on a moonless night, he had tried to use the harpoon to gig the flounder, exposed in the soft mud flats and sandbars by the light of a lantern on a john boat. We would let the boat drift over shallow water and take turns gigging flounder that had buried themselves in sand to await prey passing overhead. The flounder's silhouette was as distinctive as a pretty woman's profile in a cameo. A 3-pronged gig brought the flounder into the boat cleanly. Capers' harpoon was so large that the fish was mutilated and its flesh ruined by the blow. Once Capers used the harpoon to land a 50-pound sand shark, but even then it proved too much weapon for not enough fish. So it lay unused that summer in the gunwale of the boat, tied to 100 feet of thick marine rope. From time to time, Capers would justify its remaining there by reminding Jordan that the descendants of William Eliot never went to sea unprepared for any emergency. But there were too many fish to catch with regular tackle, and we even landed a cobia weighing over 40 pounds. I cooked those cobia steaks over a campfire with corn oil, butter, and lemon juice, and that became the first recipe I ever sold to a newspaper. In the first week of August, Mike hit a triple off the wall at College Park in Charleston, driving in 3 runs and winning the lower state champion for the Waterford American Legion team. Capers had been on third, I was on second, and Jordan on first, when Mike teed off on the first pitch by the Conway relief pitcher. The 4 of us were growing strong together, coming into our season as athletes at the same time. When Jordan pitched, nothing was safe if the ball went to the outfield, where Mike played a swift left field, and Capers covered an amazing amount of ground in center. No one dared test my now legendary throwing arm in right. Jordan knew we played a cunning outfield. Little got by us, nothing threw us, and we always hit the cutoff man. After the baseball season was over, we moved into my family's fishing camp on the southwest side of the Isle of Orion for the rest of the summer. During the first week, we loaded the Middleton's 18-foot Rincon with extra tanks of gas, chose a day of superb calm and a weather report that called for nothing but clear skies, then struck out with our 75-horsepower motor for the Gulf Stream. The older fishermen spoke of the Gulf Stream in reverential tones as a great secret indigo river born in the south, bringing a warm current and the traffic of marlin and whales toward the North Star and England. Out there, the waters were silver or cobalt blue, and the fish weighed as much as automobiles. All fishermen who returned from the Gulf Stream told stories of wonder and exhaustion about the strength of the great fish coaxed up from the depths. It took us an hour to get to the open sea, and we had told no one of our plans because no adult would have allowed such a long trip in such a small boat. Before sunrise, we had passed the last buoy, marking the channel opening. The sea was lake-like as the first light hit it, and the bow of our boat was pointed in the direction of Africa. We felt as adventurous as though our destination actually was Cameroon on the Ivory Coast. In a cooler, we had packed enough food and drink to last for 2 days. We were averaging 20 knots as we got farther and farther away from the sight of land. My mama would kill my Jewish ass if she knew where I was right this minute, Mike said, as he scanned the horizon and saw only an endless circle of water. She thinks I'm crabbing for my dinner with chicken necks as we speak. We should have brought a radio, Jordan said. Low country boys don't need no radios, Capers said, keeping his eye on the compass and the boat pointed due east. We were born in the pluff mud with gills and flippers. Man, I was born to go out to the Gulf Stream. We don't need radios, California boy, I teased, because we've got gonads big as Goodyear blimps. You've got brains the size of houseflies, said Jordan, surveying the ocean around him. Lucky this is such a lame ocean. You wouldn't stick your big toe in the Pacific without a radio. They didn't have any radios on the Mayflower, Capers said. Columbus couldn't call back to chat with Ferdinand. Nothing to fear, the master mariner's here. Nobody knows we're out here, Jordan said. The guy at the marina knows we're going on a trip, I said. We filled up 6 tankfuls of fuel. We couldn't go if we told our parents, Capers said. My folks would have a cow if they knew I was out here, I said. Capers called over the sound of the engine. It might drive your father to drink. I ignored the remark and looked back at where land was supposed to be. Hold on. Let me see something here. Sorry, just a minute. I think that's where we stopped for now. So there were questions that go along with that portion of this very long excerpt, this very long chapter. So you can get started on those now. I hope you liked it.